Okay, in part two of Unit 8, we're going to be talking about Japan and Korea and most of those places, mainly how they're influenced so much by China. Japan, of course, adopts Confucianism and Buddhism, and many of those practices become a part of their culture. But we'll also talk about a very special religion because of Japan's isolation. Japan is a string of islands, which is called an archipelago. And in that, they're going to develop a special religion called Shinto. And you'll find out more about that in this video.
Okay, this is Unit 8, Part 2 video on Japan. Okay, in this SOL, we're going to talk about how technological advances and economic interdependence and cultural interactions are going to play a role. And we're going to describe how Japan had an emphasis on the impact of Shinto and Buddhism and the influence of Chinese culture on Japan. Okay, so first let's talk about Japan. Japan is a very, very mountainous string of islands. A string of islands is called an archipelago. And the Sea of Japan, or the East Sea, between Japan and the Asian mainland are going to play a big reason in why there's so much cultural diffusion between Korea, China, and Japan. And obviously they're right next door to these countries, so the proximity or closeness to it are going to play a role. But also Japan is very isolated at the same time because they're an island, or actually a string of islands in this case. Okay, so let's look. Japan's geography. First off, it is very mountainous. Mountains make up most of the land, and only 20% of the land is suitable for farming. So one of the things you had to do was find a crop that had a very high yield for a small amount of land area. And so what they did is they came up with rice, and then they found some really cool ways to grow it. One was terracing. Terracing is when you cut levels into the hillside and then grow your crops. Here's an example of that in Japan. As you can see, it's pretty cool. Those are rice fields that have been cut into a hillside. Now, they also get a great deal of their food from the sea. Seafood is a major part of the Japanese diet, and again, that's what happens when you live on islands. Now also, Japan has been plagued for years with frequent earthquakes, typhoons, floods, and volcanic eruptions. And some cool stuff in their mythology is, of course, used to explain that. So just like the other cultures where there were myths and gods to explain the forces of nature, Japan had those as well, including stuff like the tidal jewels and some stuff like that. And here's an example of a artist rendering of a Japanese myth about the tidal wave. Okay, because of this isolation, Japan is actually able to develop a religion that is sort of exclusive to them, and it's called Shinto. Shinto means the way of the gods, and basically it's tied into a lot of other cultural beliefs. The family is very important, their ancestors are very important. As a matter of fact, in Shinto, Japanese families believe that their families descend from a special spirit called a kami. And they also believe there are gateways to the spirit world, as in the picture, which is called a torii. Now, there's a great deal of importance on nature in this, forces of nature and ancestors within this religion. And then it also sort of supports the idea of the state religion, which was worship of the emperor. Japan saw their emperor as a god on earth, and he had those powers. Now, the cool thing is that later on, through Korea and China, Buddhism is going to be introduced to Japan, specifically more Zen Buddhism, which emphasizes meditation a great deal more. And it will blend very, very nicely with Shinto and the ideas of nature. There you go, good old Buddha. Okay, so in your notes, I would like for you right here to explain Japan's geography having an impact on its food and the creation of Shinto. Don't forget, you can stop the videos anytime you need to fill out your notes. Okay, so what about the influence of Chinese culture on Japan? First, in terms of writing, you can see on the graphic the writing of China and compared to Japan. Very, very similar. Also, their architecture is very similar. Many shared features throughout those. In terms of government, there's a heavy influence of Confucianism on the Japanese government and the idea that it was strongly centralized, and knowing your role in your culture. And then lastly, Buddhism. Of course, Buddhism will come through Korea, from China through Korea to Japan, and Buddhism will sort of blend with Shinto to form a cultural and base of their religious beliefs. Now, one particular ruler of Japan, Prince Shotoku, is sort of responsible for a lot of this cultural exchange between Korea and Japan. What it is that Korea is a cultural bridge between Japan and China. So, literature, art, clothing, porcelain, road system, writing, okay, obviously architecture again, all kinds of stuff that comes from China through Korea to Japan. Okay, so now in your notes, we want to analyze some of the ways that China influenced Japan and create a theory as to which was the most important right here in your notes. Okay, so what are the big ideas of this video? Japan's isolation and mountainous terrain affected their food production and allowed them to create a religion unique to their culture. And then Japan was also heavily influenced by its neighbors from Korea and China, especially in the world of writing and architecture, their governmental systems, and with Buddhism coming in.